Hey everyone, welcome to Journey Church Online. My name is Mark and I'm your online host for the day. It's great to be with you and glad you guys have joined us and we're going to get to have this time together to connect with God, to focus in on who He is and what He's done for us. And the band's going to lead us in a couple moments in some songs, but I wanted to share a verse with you as we get started today. It's from Psalm chapter 147. It says, "Sing to the Lord with grateful praise, make music to our God on the harp." Now, I don't think they're going to play a harp today in the band, but they'll have other instruments. But really what that verse is all about is having this grateful praise to God, that we want to make this music to God. And so as we have music and these songs, it's a way that we can show our gratitude to Him and the praise to Him for who He is and everything He's done for us. So let's join now as we get started for the service with the band as a way we can connect with God.
Let the King of my heart be the mountain where I run, the fountain I drink from. Oh, He is my song. And let the King of my heart be the shadow where I hide, the ransom for my life. Oh, He is my song. 'Cause You are good, You're good. Oh, You are good, You're good. Oh, You are good, You're good. Oh, You are good, You're good. Let the King of my heart be the wind inside my sails, the anchor in the waves. Oh, He is my song. And let the King of my heart be the fire inside my veins, the echo of my days. Oh, He is my song. Let the King of my heart be the wind inside my sails, the anchor in the waves. Oh, He is my song. And let the King
My mouth will speak the praise of the Lord. I will extol you, my God and my King, and bless your name forever and ever. Every day I will bless you and praise your name forever and ever. Great is the Lord, and greatly to be praised, and his greatness is unsearchable. All your works shall give thanks to you, O Lord, and all of your saints shall bless you. They shall speak of the glory of your kingdom and tell of your power, to make known to the children your mighty deeds and the glorious splendor of your kingdom. The Lord is righteous in all his ways, and kind in all of his works. The Lord is near to all who call on him, to all who call on him in truth. He fulfills the desire of those who fear him. He also hears their cry and saves them. My mouth will speak the praise of the Lord.
Today, as we continue in our series called Encounters with Christ, beyond these services, we're actually encouraging you to encounter him in your everyday life, to engage in your relationship with him. And one of the best ways we can do that is by reading our Bibles. You know, for me, when I read my Bible, it's one of the best things I can do to connect with him, to encounter him in my everyday life. But it affects so many other aspects of my life. When I'm reading God's words to us and to me, it influences my marriage. It helps my interaction with my kids. It helps with my attitude and my perspective and all these other areas of my life. And that's what we want for you too. We want you to encounter Christ in every aspect of life. And reading our Bibles helps us do that. And so we've been challenging you guys all throughout this series to be reading our Bibles at least 4 days a week. Now, maybe you're doing more, which is great, but if you're looking to get started and trying that, maybe just try reading up some passages on 4 different days a week. And if you go to the blog, you'll see some resources. There's a Bible reading plan and some things on there to help you get started reading through the book of Mark, which is a biography of Jesus' life. Again, it's a way we can connect with him, but have him guide and influence our lives. The other thing you'll see on the blog is a Connect card, and you can use that card if there's any way we can help you, encourage you, or if you want to submit a prayer request. And if you're also a guest with us, we'd love to hear from you, and knowing that you're joining us today, we'll actually send you a gift just to say thanks for joining us. So check that out on the Connect card. So today, as we're jumping back into our series, Encounters with Christ, today we're going to be talking about money. Now, I know money, for some, it's kind of a touchy subject. It's kind of uncomfortable to talk about money sometimes, but you know, in the book of Mark we've been going through, Jesus actually talked about money a lot. And he didn't avoid it. He didn't stay away from it. And he knew it was a real thing and it affects a lot of areas of our life. So we're going to be looking at some things that Jesus taught about money today. And really our hope for you is you experience and encounter Christ even as we talk about money and the hope that he can bring into our life as we even deal with our finances. So let's jump in today and as we continue on in our series.
Well, hey everybody, I'm Paul. I'm one of the pastors here at The Journey, and I'm so glad that you're with us as we're in the middle of this series called Encounters with Christ. And in this series, we're looking at encounters that Jesus had with people and what that said about them, what it says about Jesus, and what it means for us, and the opportunity even for us to have our own encounter with Christ as well. We've been looking in the book of Mark. It's the second book of the New Testament. It's a biography of Jesus' life, and it's the earliest one that we have, and so it's kind of the closest to Jesus' life that we can get. And we've been looking in the book of Mark throughout this whole series as we look at these encounters with Christ. Today, we're looking at an encounter. Well, it's kind of indirectly an encounter. It's more of an observation as Jesus is people watching. My wife Jennifer loves to people watch, and she could sit someplace and just watch people and try to figure out what's going on in their life and what's happening in this situation. She loves that. And if we're at a restaurant, and maybe you're somebody like this too, or maybe you've watched people like that you're at a restaurant and all of a sudden you're kind of out of a conversation because you're trying to figure out, like, is that couple together, or are they breaking up, or what's going on in that family? And Jennifer and I, and through the years, we've sat at a restaurant where we've both tried to figure out what's going on over there at that table, what's happening in their life right now. This last week, Jennifer and I were both in Minneapolis at a church planting assessment center. There was a number of couples who were looking to start churches, and we were part of the assessor team. So we spent the whole week people watching, watching these couples interact and dialogue, and how do they do in leading things, or how do they interrelate as couples, and just kind of observing. The story, the account that we look at today is Jesus people watching, and he's people watching at church. I want to look at Mark chapter 12, verse 41. Mark chapter 12, verse 41, it says this: Jesus sat down opposite the place where the offerings were put, and he watched the crowd putting their money into the temple treasury. Many rich people threw in large amounts. So Jesus is at the temple, and he's people watching the offering. I don't think probably a lot of people maybe knew who Jesus was at that time or noticed him. I mean, it was a very large space. But that'd be a little bit of pressure, right? Jesus watching the offering. Can you imagine at the Journey? And maybe you've never been here in person, but we have boxes at the back for giving if people want to give that way. Can you imagine if one of our pastors would just kind of stand back by the box and watch people as they exit? That's what you're just gonna bypass that? Or, oh, hey, nice work, nice work. That was a good one. Odd, right? Weird and wrong. Matter of fact, that's one of the reasons why we don't pass an offering plate at the Journey. We don't have a bucket come by, because typically, if you've been in a church like that, you either feel guilty, like I should be putting something in or putting more in, or you can feel prideful. I hope people just saw what I put in. Right? It's just awkward and weird. And this court that Jesus is at, as he's people watching the offering, was at the temple in Jerusalem. And estimates are that you could put 15,000 people in that court. And there was 13 different brass receptacles that made up the different offering kind of stations. And they were these big brass receptacles that had a trumpet kind of mouth to them, and you'd put your offering into them. In Matthew chapter 6, verse 2, which is the book right in front of Mark, it's also a biography of Jesus' life. Jesus was giving his most famous sermon, and he says this in it. He says, "So when you give to the needy, don't announce it with trumpets, as the hypocrites do in the synagogues or the temple, and on the streets, to be honored by others. Truly, I tell you, they've received their reward in full." The practice of the day oftentimes was that people would go to the temple, and they would stop and take whatever offering they were going to give, and they would get smaller coins. So they'd same amount of money, but they would just get more coins. And then when they would go into the temple and they would drop their offering into the brass receptacle, all these coins would be going into it, and it would kind of reverberate through the court, and people would begin to turn and look like, wow, who's giving that much money. And I think Jesus, what he talked about in Matthew chapter 6, verse 2, is what he's observing here. They're not actually blowing trumpets, but they're putting them in this brass receptacle with this trumpet kind of opening, and it's like they're getting all the glory for themselves as they pour in their offerings. People are turning and looking, and this was during Passover. It was the kind of the most holy of holidays, the most important of holidays. Thousands of people were streaming into Jerusalem, making the pilgrimage there, and so Jesus is sitting there watching as everybody is hustling and bustling into the temple, and all sorts of people are there, and then there's these people who are just pouring kind of all these coins into the treasury. Jesus observing what he condemned in Matthew chapter 6, verse 2. And then we see this next verse. Now listen, Jesus wasn't against rich people. He wasn't against people giving a lot for their offering. But what he was against was the show. What he was against was people seeking their own glory. And as Jesus watches these rich people pouring in kind of all these coins, he notices something else as he people watches. Verse 42. But a poor widow came and put in 2 very small copper coins worth only a few cents. Here's this poor widow in the midst of all of these other people, and she goes up to the offering receptacle and she drops in 2 small copper coins, and he kind of just parenthesizes that and says worth only a couple cents. Right? It was called a lepta. It was the smallest coin in the region. She just drops these 2 in, and I'm guessing nobody turned around and looked at her. No one noticed when she dropped her coins in the offering. I mean, these rich people who had exchanged it had put in all these coins, and people turning and looking like, who's doing that? But no one would have noticed her. She was a poor widow. It's already kind of a strike against her that she was a woman in that culture. It just made things harder, more difficult. And now she's a widow. That makes it extremely hard. Matter of fact, just being a woman who's a widow would have probably made her poor. And so it's interesting that he says a poor widow. I think what he's saying is she was like desperately poor. Like she was barely hanging on. And Jesus calls his disciples over to him. And he says this in verse 43 and 44. He says, calling his disciples to him, Jesus said, truly I tell you, this poor widow has put more into the treasury than all the others. They all gave out of their wealth, but she out of her poverty put in everything, all that she had to live on. And Jesus says, in essence, like, hey, when you compare the two, these rich people who just kind of dumped all these coins in, and then this poor widow who just put these 2 small copper coins in, her gift was greater. And that really made no sense in the religious context in which they lived. The idea for many in that day was that if you had a lot of money, it was because God blessed you. His favor was on you. And so God's favor was on rich people, not on poor people. And certainly the temple could do way more with what the rich person gave than what this poor widow gave. I mean, what are you going to do with a few cents? But Jesus just totally flips things on their head, as he oftentimes did. The rich, they gave out of surplus, but she gave out of her poverty all that she had to live on. I think it's important that we see that she gave 2 coins. Because she gave 2 coins, that means she really could have kept 1 for herself and given 1 to God. And nobody would have questioned her, would have thought wrong of her. Matter of fact, they probably would have said, just keep both for yourself. But she certainly could have just kept 1 and given 1, and even that would have been generous, but she gave it all. It showed, I think, more about her devotion and her heart than anything else. When we see a story like this, we can start, I think, thinking about our own money and stuff, and maybe even getting a little bit nervous, like, where's this going? I need to get my credit card away from the computer. I need to put my wallet, throw it in the corner. Like, I'm a little nervous where the pastor's going to go with this message. But this is really what Jesus wants for us, not what he wants from us. This woman was putting her trust, her devotion into God. It was like, I'm all in. And that's really what he wants for every single one of us. And that's why her gift was considered way greater than these others. I mean, it is clear the size of the gift was not the most significant thing to Jesus. The rich, they gave a contribution. This woman made a commitment, right? She made a commitment, sacrifice. I love this story because it just reminds us, and we've seen this already in the book of Mark, that Jesus sees us. Right? Everybody saw the rich people putting in their coins, all the coins, and people turned their heads. No one was going to see that with the woman. I mean, she put in 2 coins. It probably didn't even make any noise. She was somebody who was going to be overlooked and dismissed. But Jesus saw her, and her gift mattered greatly to him. And I love that, right? That is so important for each one of us too, right? Like, I don't have to have an abundance of anything that the world says is important to please him, to matter to him, to be loved by him, to be used by God, to make a difference. Through this encounter, whatever little unimpressive thing that you or I have, it matters greatly to God. And it's so much bigger than just money and stuff. Whenever we look at a passage like this, I think it's important to look at what comes after it, what comes before it. And right before the passage that we just read of this poor widow and Jesus people watching, we read this account in Mark chapter 12, verse 38 through 40. As he taught, Jesus said, so he's outside of the temple, he's teaching people. It says, as he taught, Jesus said, watch out for the teachers of the law, these religious leaders who are kind of making up all these rules and laws and making sure that people follow the laws. They like to walk around in flowing robes and be greeted with respect in the marketplaces, and have the most important seats in the synagogues and the places of honor at banquets. They devour widows' houses and for a show make lengthy prayers. These men will be punished most severely. Jesus calls out the religious leaders for their sham righteousness. Right? They think that they're holy. They think that they're better than everybody else. They love to take honor and receive glory from other people, which is exactly what Jesus just talked about in the temple, when he's like, hey, these righteous people who are trying to make all this noise with trumpets that are showing what they gave, like, they've already received their reward. They're getting their glory from people. What was more important was that we would receive, God's care and love and, our value from him. And the poor widow does that. These religious leaders, he calls them out for this righteousness, this sham righteousness of theirs. And one of the things he talks about is how they take advantage of the most vulnerable, right? And the example he uses, widows' houses. And so make no mistake, as he moves into the very next account, what does he notice? A poor widow. And he takes her and he pits her against the religious leaders, right? He says, which one is more like me? Which one, like the religious leaders thought they were more devout, that they were the most God-fearing, the most holy people, but he stacks them up against this poor widow who's overlooked and dismissed, and he celebrates her. He elevates her and her wholehearted devotion. Like, you've got to love Jesus because he consistently does things like this. It's like sticking it to the man, right? Like, Jesus is like, he just throws it all out there. He says, no, you think this, but no, this is who you should be looking to. In 1 Samuel chapter 16, verse 7 in the Old Testament of the Bible, the prophet Samuel is asked by God to go and anoint a king. And he's looking for this like rugged, kingly kind of person. And but God speaks to him about that. And he says this, but the Lord said to Samuel, do not consider his appearance or his height, for I have rejected him. The Lord does not look at the things people look at. People look at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. In a world of comparison, that is such good news for every single one of us. God wants our heart. He wants our trust. He wants whatever little unimpressive things I have, like it matters to him, and he can do something great in and through you no matter what your story. In the book of Mark, we have been seeing some consistent themes, right? Like Jesus for the underdog. We see that over and over again, and even with this poor widow. Jesus has a disdain for the religious. We see that again through these people who are trying to let everybody else see how much they gave. And Jesus is always about our trust and devotion. But he wants our heart. And that's the heartbeat of this message that we look at today. He wants our hearts. And that is such good news. He's for the underdog. He's against the religious. He wants our trust and devotion because it levels the playing field for all of us. Like this woman's sacrifice shows Jesus that God has her heart and her devotion. And he says that her devotion was greater than any that he saw that day. It totally leveled the playing field for her. And it does the same for us. This story that we look at today, it isn't about money and stuff. And yet it is, right? Like it's about trust and devotion. But at the same time, it is because our wallet, our purse give a window into our soul about what's important, about what we trust, about what we see as our provider. It's like the rich young ruler that we looked at last week where, he asked Jesus, like, what do I need to do to get into heaven? And he's kept all the rules, but then Jesus knows his heart. He knows his trust and devotion. He knows it's all tied into his money and his stuff. And when Jesus confronts him on it, the guy walks away from Jesus. He just cannot let go. He cannot really just put his trust in God. So for the next few minutes, I want to talk about our money. I think it would be a disservice not to talk about it. I want to honor the passage that God has given us in the Bible, and it speaks about it. And so maybe that makes you a little uneasy. Maybe you had a bad experience with church or money, and maybe you need to kind of look away or flip through a magazine for a moment while I talk about this. At the same point, I hope you don't, because it's so much larger than like, hey, give money to the journey. It's some larger principles that I think can make a real difference in your life. Think about that woman. As she walked into the temple and she placed her 2 coins in the offering, the temple didn't need her money, right? I mean, God didn't need her money. I mean, her couple cents wasn't going to make a huge difference to anything. And God doesn't need your money either. But we need what God has. And we need to trust him. We need to be fully devoted. We need to live generously for what it does for us and for the good of others and what it means for our commitment to God. Our money oftentimes is one of the last things that we surrender to God. Can I really trust him? And so here's the challenge I want to give to every single one of us. Would you take a step forward to grow in your generosity and trust? It will matter in your personal lives, it'll matter in the lives of others, and it will grow your relationship with God. Now, if you don't give here regularly at the Journey, you might think, well, hey, I don't think they really need my money, right? Like maybe you grew up in a church where it was pretty clear they needed your money, and maybe they brought the little sad kid on stage and were like, hey, can you help? Or they turned off the heat. Like it was obvious, and you felt guilty, and so you gave. But man, you came here, and we don't really talk about it. Or if you've been in person, we don't pass the offering plate, and you're like, they don't need my money. Or maybe you're just like, hey, I'm online. I'm not really taking up that much, and so they don't need my money. Or you've been here in our physical building, and you look around, you're like, man, that's a pretty cool building, and they got great kids' rooms. I don't think they need my money. Or maybe you've even heard us talking about generosity and all the ways that we've been able to impact in our community, and we thank people for their generosity, and you think, man, they must have some deep pockets. They got some outside funding or something. Like, they don't need my money. Now, the truth is, we don't have a bunch of deep pockets. We don't have anybody that's giving 10%, 15%, 20% of our budget. Like, nobody like that. It takes all of us. And we don't have outside funding. And we try to be pretty frugal as a church. Our budget is 20 to 30%, usually lower than most churches our size. And so the good news is, like, we don't need your money. We don't need your money to pay light bills or salaries or insurance or office supplies or snow removal. The people who have been faithfully giving here at the Journey, they cover that, which is awesome. But your giving is needed to reach more people, to help the next generation and children and teenagers connect with Jesus, to help our network teams reach more and more people in our community, to care more and more for the poor and for orphans. You get to give to some things that are impacting all sorts of real people in real ways, and you don't even have to give your money to take care of the day-to-day expenses at the Journey. And the truth is, when it comes to all of those things, we don't have the resources to match the vision and the opportunities that God has been putting in front of us, and you can be an answer to that. But it's more than just the difference that you can make. It's taking steps of trust and devotion. It's giving God more control of your heart. Don't be fooled into thinking that generosity is born out of wealth, right? Like, when I get X, Y, Z, then I'll be generous with my life. Generosity is more a matter of the heart than it is of our circumstances. It's more a matter of trust than it is abundance. Becky knows all about that. She has not grown in this area out of wealth. She's simply tried to take some steps to trust God, to trust Him as her provider, to take a step of devotion, to really believe that He is her provider, He's the one who cares for her, and she's going to trust Him. Here's a little bit of her story.
I love that our church delivers our messages to us in a set series of teachings each month. The Tithing Challenge was issued to us by Paul during a series about money. He explained that the money we have is not really ours. God allows us to have it. Paul also explained that we are only the managers of God's money. I had never looked at it that way before. In my eyes, the money was mine. The Tithing Challenge was for 90 days to give 10% faithfully. If we didn't see God's blessings and provision for us after the 90 days, the church would refund the total, no questions asked. If it was causing us any hardships at all, we would get it all back. I decided right there in my seat that day, I'm in. What could I lose? When I got home from church that day, I set up a money bag with an envelope in it for my tithing. I have a 3x5 card in there to keep track of the total. I put more faith and trust in God than ever before. I am self-employed, so it can be scary at times as to where my next sale was going to come from. Well, the very next day, my phone started to ring. I got orders online and heard from customers who I thought I had lost. I was so excited to be able to give more money back to helping others. In the first 4 months, I was able to give more money than I had ever given in a year's time, and I didn't miss it at all because my mindset had changed, along with my total trust in God to provide for me. He didn't stop at just blessing me, He also blessed my family. The Tithing Challenge was issued to me a couple of years ago in November. In early December, my daughter came to me worried about how she was going to make Christmas happen for her 3 kids. small kids. As she needed some repairs on her car, had a rather large utility bill that was due 2 days before Christmas, or the lights were due to be shut off, I started to pray, asking God to bring a solution for her worries. Well, God showed up in a big way. She called the electric company after I told her to and made arrangements, which gave her an extension until January 30th. And the mechanic that did the repairs on her car allowed her to post-date a check until the end of January as well. A Christmas blessing, along with countless other blessings. My faith and trust in God continues to grow, and I don't worry about where my next dollar is coming from. Thank you, God, for opening my heart to trust and my wallet to share.
You know, I love Becky's story of trust, of obedience, and the ways that God has shown his faithfulness and his provision to her over this last year plus. Man, it's awesome to see her trust God, to see that kind of devotion and see God work and move in her life. And each time that he provides and each time that he shows up in those ways, it builds her confidence to trust him again. And that goes beyond just our money, right? Like the more that we take those steps to trust God and he proves himself faithful, and he is, it gives us confidence to trust him for the next thing, whatever that might mean in our life, that God goes with us. He's for us. That's amazing. You know, Becky talked about the tithing challenge that she took. That actually comes from the Old Testament, book of Malachi, chapter 3, verse 10. And God was responding to the people of Israel who were holding back on him. And he's like, guys, what are you doing? Like, I'm the one who's provided for you all along the way. Trust me. Right? And one of the ways that he was asking them to trust him was by them bringing back some of what he gave them. Like, it all comes from God anyway. He says, I want you to take that 100% that I give you, just bring back the first part, that like the first 10% of that, bring it back to me as a sign that you're going to trust me, that I'm your provider, that I'm the one who can take care of you, that your devotion to me, live on the other 90%, live on that, enjoy that, be blessed by that, but just bring this back to me as a way to trust me. And it's the only place in the Bible that God says to test him. I think because he knows how close this is to our heart, how hard it is for us to do that. So he says, test me in this. In Malachi chapter 3, verse 10, it says this: bring the whole tithe, that's kind of that first 10%, into the storehouse, into the temple, into the church, that there may be food in my house. Test me in this, says the Lord Almighty, and see if I will not throw open the floodgates of heaven and pour out so much blessing that there will not be room enough to store it. Maybe for you, again, this is a step that you can take. And if you want to take that step like Becky did, you can actually check out the blog this week, or you can go to our donate page on our website. There's a form there for the tithing challenge. And ultimately what that is you kind of fill that information out. And for the next 3 months, you say, okay, I'm going to tithe. I'm going to bring that first part back to God at the local church here at The Journey. And we'll track that. And if you get to the end of 3 months and you feel like, and God has not shown up in my life, God has not provided for me, God has not taken care of me, I've not experienced his blessing in my life, you can simply ask for the money and we will give it all back. Everything that you gave over those 3 months, we'll give it back. If that helps you take that step, like I want to do that, right, but I'm not sure if I have the courage to do that, I'm a little nervous about that, like this hopefully can give you the catalyst to do that. And we just believe God is our provider. So he'll provide for The Journey, he'll provide for you. And if you get to the end of that 3 months, you say, you know what, I need that money back, we will just simply give that all back to you. No questions asked. And if all of this last few minutes has kind of freaked you out, and maybe you're just a little bit unsure, you're like, I don't know, I think The Journey's probably just after my money, then here's what I challenge you to do. Just be generous somewhere. Be generous somewhere. Okay, you don't have to give it here then. Be generous somewhere, right? Be generous somewhere. But trust God. Take a step. As Jesus sat and people watched, he threw the disciples a curveball, right? Like the greatest gift he saw that day was 2 small copper coins given by this poor widow. But it shouldn't surprise us. Like, this is Jesus' MO. Jesus always for the underdog. He was always against the religious show-off, and he always wants growing trust and devotion. And the truth is, our money, our stuff is one way that we show God where our heart is. Right? It's the thing that we want to hold on to so tightly. Like, I don't know if I can trust him with that. I got to take care of myself. I got to watch out for me. And he says, boy, if you just open that up to me, you'd realize that I'm your provider. I'm the one that's given you everything that you have in the first place, and I will take care of you. He wants our trust. He wants our devotion. When we live that way, he can do something in and through you that is amazing, that is great, with whatever little or much you have to offer. At the Journey, we talk about the giving process, and it talks about being a first-time giver, being automatic and intentional. So to have some kind of intentionality rather than I'll throw a few bucks here, a few bucks there. I'm going to have some intentionality, maybe even recurring giving. To tithing, what we just talked about, and Becky did the tithing challenge, to generosity. What's one step forward that you can take in this area of generosity? I mean, ultimately, like the poor widow, it's not about the portion that you give, it's the proportion, it's the commitment, it's the trust, it's the devotion. And that's ultimately what Jesus wants. We see it over and over again in the book of Mark. He simply wants people to trust him. Why? Because he's good. He has our good in mind. He wants what's best for us. He says, if you just trust me, man, would you experience me at work in your life? And this is one way that we can do it. So what's one step you can take on that kind of generosity journey? Let's pray together. God, would you help us? God, I know in giving a message like this sometimes, there's going to be some that are like, I knew it, the church is after my money. And God, that is so not our heart. We want what you want for people, not from people. For us, not from, us and from others. God, we want to trust you. And I love this story that we looked at today with this poor widow. God, like, you saw people trying to throw in a whole bunch of money and be recognized for it. And you're like, man, her gift was way greater because it was a level of commitment that they didn't have. And you saw her with like the little that she had to offer. You saw her, it mattered to you, and we matter to you. And you see us. And God, you just want our hearts. You want us to trust you. You want us to be devoted to you. And you're so faithful and you're so good and you're a provider. So would you help us to take a step forward in just releasing our grip on our stuff because we realize that you're the one that's given it to us. So God, would you help us to live open-handed? Would you help us to trust you? Would you help us to take a step in that? In Jesus' name, amen.
Paul, thanks for sharing with us that message and the opportunity and challenges that we have and how even in our money we can encounter Christ. And if you want to give right now, you can actually go to our donate page and set up recurring giving through the PushPay portal. And you also see the 10% giving challenge on the same page as well. But we also have another opportunity this month as well. If you set up your new recurring giving or you decided to do the 10% giving challenge, someone from the Journey will give $500 to the Journey for everyone that signs up for that. So if you decided to do that, it's like you're giving even more. We just want to say thank you to you guys for your generosity and your giving and the impact that makes. And it's really our hope for you that as you give, that you see that God works in you and through you as we follow Jesus and spread kindness and share hope, and we're doing that together. Have a great week.